So I always like to start these conversations the same way. And most of the time I'm talking to directors and actors and stuff, so I'm really sort of curious as to like why would you go into a business where you're constantly under anxiety and pressure, like 24/7 to make a living. But with you, I think I'm really curious, like what was the moment in your life that happened to you that made you think this is what I want to do. I want to be a journalist. I want to tell people stories.
I didn't actually really have that moment. I kind of fell into it in a way, in that, I went to film school to be a film critic and maybe a screenwriter. And in that I realized that I really liked documentaries and I liked making them. So maybe I sort of like leaned toward that with a sense of like maybe I would do something after graduation. I wasn't very organized, I think, at like 24, 25 years old, and my thoughts weren't very organized. I feel like my like likes and interests were going in a million different places.
Hmm.
But luckily, while I was in school, I created a queer website that did really well. And that led to an opportunity at the Huffington Post, and that led to an opportunity at NPR, which is my first like real world, like big person job. I did like blogging for WBZ in Chicago, which didn't like pay great, but excuse me, in terms of like visibility and just like putting my name out there, it was like fabulous. And that just, it was like one of those things that one thing kept leading to another. And then in 2016, I had just quit a job that made me really unhappy, because I thought I would like maybe write a book or something. But instead, I got a sort of part-time gig that again paid like fucking peanuts. It was like $35 an article, being the East Coast correspondent for The Advocate. And that was right when, Trump had just announced his intention to run for office, and we were seeing all this anti-trans legislation start to bubble up across the country. And I had a sense then that there were people that were going to need their stories told. And a lot of the things that I'd been doing and the things that I'd been a little more interested in historically just didn't seem that important anymore. What seemed most important was to focus on the impact of these politically motivated attacks all across the country. And, during that time, I went to North Carolina, which had just passed HB2, the nation's first bathroom bill, and I met people on the ground who were impacted. I had dinner with them. I met their families. I went to their houses. And it was a lovely experience to be part of their communities and their worlds for a moment. Like, it really like opened my universe. And I felt like I wanted to commit to doing more of that. Like, I think I had some sort of a rumbling then that day, that day that I got to North Carolina was going to be the first day of the rest of my life and the first day of the rest of my career. And it's really just completely reshaped what I do, what I think about myself doing in the world, the kind of like impact I want to have, just because like there were so many articles about HB2, but there were few that were interested at all in telling the voices of people who were actually affected by it. And that's
Hmm.
really what my work does. It tells the stories of the people who are affected by these policies that we see in the news. And then, they're treated so bloodlessly that we don't think about them having like a real world effect on people's lives, and I want to show that they do. These things matter and these people's voices matter, even when we, are so intent on erasing them.
So was that the kernel for the book then, the shifting sort of political tide in the country? And then I guess the question would be why teenagers? What was it about this particular experience that you found that you wanted to write this book about?
Ooh, I'll do that question first because you're the first person who's asked that. The other one I've been asked all the time. So this one's new. I love a new question.
Mhm.
Um, so I had tried to interview younger kids for a book like this, but it just didn't work. And for folks who aren't familiar, I'm sure you'll get it in the intro. But I spent a year traveling the country to spend time with trans youth in 7 different states. We'll see if we can do this in order: South Dakota, Alabama, West Virginia, Texas, Illinois. What was after Illinois? Florida and California.
Yep.
And my goal was to just sort of show them as they are, to sort of like follow them around, and depict what they do every day. And that's sort of like classic fly on the wall documentary style, which makes sense because I went to documentary school, right? And my goal in doing that was to sort of cut past these like this dehumanizing rhetoric about their lives to just show them being kids, being
Mhm.
people in the world, having these like mundane and sometimes profound experiences that the rest of us do. Like we sometimes treat them like monsters and aliens, but they're just like humans who are, humans like the rest of us. It's really not that complicated, but we make it very complicated. And I had tried to interview younger kids for the book because at first I didn't really know what it would be. Like I knew that a book needed like this needed to exist. And I knew that we needed kind of a moral intervention here because you hear like all of these like anti-trans talking points that they're spewing. And it's just so alien to my experience. It's so alien to like the stories of the families that I've known for so long that I just don't recognize any like reality or humanity in it. So to me, it's like the way you speak back to that is by letting these kids speak for themselves. But the problem is that when you work with little kids, they're cute and sweet, and it's lovely to spend time with them, right? I mean, just the energy that children have, I'm like, put that in a cup and give it to me, but they can't narrativize their lives yet. They can't
Yeah.
really reflect from that like outside perspective that you learn to do when you get just a little bit older. And I think you
Mhm.
start to learn that like introspection and reflection when you're a teenager, right? So teenagers can do that. They can sort of piece together things. They can think big picture. They can think about like things like themes. They were often like helping me write the book in a way because they had their own ideas about what their story was about and what they wanted it to be about. And then even more than that, I wanted it to be really clear that all of these kids were the driving force in their own lives. Like I really wanted to focus on their own agency here because there's so much in the way of like myths and stigma here, and that these kids aren't really trans, that their parents are forcing them to be trans, which is absolutely fucking ridiculous
Mhm.
because like if you're a parent out there, you can't get your kid to do anything. You can't
Mhm.
get them to do the dishes or like do their homework, let alone be trans. I used to babysit in college for this couple who were absolutely lovely. And I'm sure their kids turned out well, but at the time they were total monsters. They were toddlers, right? So the idea that I could force one of those toddlers to be trans or their parents could have forced them, like,
Mhm.
no, I could barely like keep them still for 2 seconds. It's utterly absurd. But I think that you like really get like that sense of agency when you hang out with older kids, when you hear about the world like through their eyes, when they're telling you who they are, it makes it so much more difficult to refute. It's also the reason that I didn't just focus on the parents because like the parents are, a small part of the chapter, but I felt like, that sort of in a way that, how do you say, that creates like this vacuum
Mhm.
that Republicans get to fill with just like misinformation and bile and fear. And I sort of wanted to head that off at the pass by just letting these kids be the main characters. Like it's their story. They deserve to tell it because I think that when you hear it from them, like it becomes a lot harder to pretend that this isn't real and that this is happening. Like these are these
Mhm.
kids' lives, these are these kids' experiences, and they'd be happy to talk about it if they were ever asked.